lot of architecture in the world today on every continent of buildings that are much, much larger than you would think people of our height would build.
Cities in America that look as though they were constructed in medieval Europe.
The outside's incredible, but the inside is built like a palace.
I'm not sure if there were even any schools of architecture back then.
How did they know how to do this stuff?
We're at the pinnacle of our civilization now. This is the best it gets. The best we've ever done. Look at the quality of these walls.
Now you'll go through a neighborhood and every home looks the same.
Had we known we're going backwards, everyone would be pissed.
As an architect of 20 years, I like to look at a building as telling its own story. I like to say that stones don't lie.
And they're giving us timelines of like a year. It was built in a year.
The history that we've been told is a lie.
Why would a regular-sized human make something so massive?
How did they build that beautiful, beautiful building? Was that building here longer?
I feel like the building was here already.
What was actually in the towers? What kind of technology was up there?
These buildings were built by the prior civilization.
A beautiful, easy, graceful method of travel flushed down the drains.
Nope, no more airships.
And they have to lie to us about it. They had to write the storybooks. We learn about one fire, the Chicago Great Fire.
There were fires in every major city.
Burned to the ground.
It's impossible for any stone building to be burning down.
What's being kept from us is huge.
What a world it must have been.
So there's literally been a cover-up of history more than one way.
Oh, the humanity.
Love, peace, and power, everybody. Welcome to the Mystery Arcade Occult Multiversity. I am Hilel Kiano, aka Konami Codes. Thank you so much for joining me on this Master 11 Universal Day. Welcome to everybody in the chat. I want to thank you for joining me. We have an amazing, honored guest. I am honored to welcome back Michelle Gibson. Michelle, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here and welcome everybody that's watching right now. It's an exciting time to be alive, and it's exciting to be a part of bringing information back in that the collective needs to have at this time to understand so much, because truth has been missing from our world for quite a long time.
Indeed it has. Indeed it has. And thank you for saying that. We don't, I wish I heard more people express, what amazing times it actually is. It's so easy to focus on the negative. But talking about it as opposed to doing something about it is never going to change anything. You have been the epitome for me in terms of being the change you want to see. I followed your work for years. I have both of your books. I have downloaded your entire channel. I want to talk about as much of that as I possibly can tonight. But primarily, I am thrilled to talk to you about your latest documentary with Stu Peters, Sean Hibbler, who is known for his many documentaries, but I really have loved his Level series. Level, the next level, Level with Me. Talking about Flat Earth, which is incredible. Anybody who hasn't seen those, you really need to see it. Lord Jamar, Dr. Narco Longo, Johnny G and Papa, the list goes on and on. I love that you are the first name and the first face and the first voice that we hear, not only in the trailer, but in the documentary itself. Can you speak a little bit about how that came about?
I think it was in August of last year, I got contacted by Sean Hibbler to be in the documentary Old World Order. And it's a passion of his. He's a wonderful person and passionate about getting this information out, getting truth out. And when he first started asking me questions, he came to where I live in Arizona and interviewed me one-on-one. And So I talked to him for about an hour and a half, and he, asked me specific questions, but he wanted me to communicate like I was talking to somebody that didn't know anything about this subject. So the idea is to reach beyond this community of people that know. And when I say community, I mean, anybody that's tuned into this subject, and it's best known as Tartaria, but I know it's the Moorish civilization, and that Tartaria was one empire of many empires that were co-creating this realm together. And so it's to get this subject that's been completely removed from our awareness back out into the collective, to people that walk by these massive buildings every day and don't even bat an eye at what they're seeing. We're surrounded by it. We live on top of it. We go to work in it. We go to school in it. We go to church in it. We go to museums in it. The strange shape of our world, by that I mean hills, where I live in Prescott, it's a very hilly place. And every day I leave my house and think, what am I looking at here? Because it's just this undulating shape in the landscape. And my belief that is part of the cataclysm that was created deliberately to do this, to take this civilization out and then to come in and build a new world on top of it, and not a good world compared to what it was. Going from benevolent, higher consciousness, life-giving, life-honoring old world to controlling new world, controlling, thieving, very mocking of the creator and humanity, and just wanting to get as much as possible, because that's all that these beings can do, is parasite. And to most of the collective, this is normal, because this is the system that has been provided for us. And there's a lot of reasons people are deeply asleep. Ongoing mind control and gaslighting and miseducation and misinformation and lies. It's very complex, because they've conditioned our beliefs, informed our views by controlling the educational system. The Rockefellers were highly involved in the beginnings of the American educational system around the 1850s, which was a lot of this stuff was coming online. And they removed critical thinking from the curriculum, and they wanted their educational system to produce people that could read, write, make basic decisions, and not question authority. That was what they wanted in their students. And talking a little bit before we started, as far as that goes, in the documentary, we talked about world fairs. And so that was one way of taking credit for what the original Moorish builders did, Moorish masons, saying, we did this, but we built it out of temporary materials, and so we meant for it to be destroyed right afterwards. That's the narrative for about 100 years worth of world fairs, starting in 1851. So the big ones were between 1850 and 1950. And it looks like they were part of how the new narrative was shaped. All the big names would go to these events. Things would be rolled out at the World's Fairs, whether it was Jack Daniels or cotton candy came out, and cotton candy was invented by a dentist, and the cotton candy machine that came out at a World's Fair, I think it was in 1904. Another dentist brought us saccharin in cotton candy. They were creating their business. So candy was the way that people were affected. Alcohol was a way people were affected. Insane asylums were a way people were affected. And I'm working for somebody that has kind of been a collaborator with me has received downloads of information about how the insane asylums are on this grid system. And so when he started plotting insane asylums with state capitals and Masonic lodge, Grand Lodges and things like that, the grid popped out. And so I'm working with him on bringing his information forward because he doesn't have his own platform that way. So they're setting the stage with these world fairs. They're causing these great fires that wipe out historic districts, and this is all over the world. We hear about the big ones. We hear about Chicago and San Francisco, but this was everywhere. And there were some big ones in antiquity, but my research has led me to believe that they created a new timeline, and they brought in this 1492 to 1942 time loop with 1717 as midpoint year. And so I think that was new. And I've done a lot of research around that time period, and a lot of stuff came out when I did that also. I think history was fabricated before a certain point in time. So what we are taught it just isn't true. Somebody wrote it up, whether it's the Jesuits or Freemasons or whoever. And then at a certain point they started, and 1717 was the same year as the Premier Grand Lodge of England was founded. It was also the same year they adopted the Anno Lucis. That was in 1717. And there were some interesting things going on around that 1717 year. And another one was the heir of King James VI and First of England and Scotland. The Stuart heir was prevented from attaining the throne of England. And that was the Georgians had come in from Hanover in Germany, and that was a whole nother story. But that was the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha that became the Windsor family later on. And they replaced the original royal houses of Europe, an obscure ducal line out of Germany. It's all connected to how the controllers came in and did this, along with the Rothschilds and Adam Weishaupt and John D. Rockefeller, who came along in the 1800s. They gave us a whole new story, and then proceeded to enslave humanity and turn the social order upside down, and give us this whole new slavery narrative, and coming from Africa and all of that. And it's like, the Moors were all over the earth. And when I first started following ley lines, I'm like, what happened to the Moors? And so a lot of my journey has been answering that question, and how that happened, and who did it, and how this whole narrative was created, divide and conquer, and use the same playbook over and over again about how to keep us divided by race and religion, and not giving us true information, changing the shape of the earth, removing ley lines from maps. I mean, there's so much to what happened, and I know I'm kind of going back and forth on a lot of things, but those are all areas that I've covered in my research that Claire's talking about. And I believe that in answer to your question, she is Moonfeather, is that I believe that it's a spiritual war, and that let's just say dark forces banded together, whether they're fallen angels or negative ETs, jealous beings that were jealous of humanity and the creator. that saw an opportunity to come in and take it all for themselves. That's why. That's why they wanted to hide it and destroy us. They don't want us to know the truth. They don't want us to know the collective power of humanity as one being, as one soul, because they can't do what they've done. And so they have to trick us into giving them our consent to rule over us, or give away our rights and our sovereignty. They have to trick us, and they're very good at it. They're very good at doing that and keeping us divided, so that even when there's a lot of people waking up, and we're hopeful that Old World Order, the documentary trailer that Kalal opened with, will reach people that don't know anything about the subject of the old world, and the huge buildings and the giants and the world fairs and the fires and the airships. Will reach people that are not acquainted with this, and it's being made available free across platforms. So the hope is that it's going to get out there and reach more people and get more people thinking for themselves, because that's really what we need. It's people that think for themselves and don't just go along with what they're told or what the narrative says, because there's a lot wrong with both. I could stop there if you want to ask questions or.
Yes, I'm not. One thing I'm never going to do is cut your wisdom. Thank you for asking Moonfeather's question. Shout out to Moonfeather. Shout out to my brother Money with Magic. Great to see you, brother. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Thank you so much, Cherie, for sharing the links. Greatly appreciate that. Love, peace, and power to everybody watching on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I appreciate you. You're going to have to everybody listening, if you're not used to it, you're going to have to get used to it real quick, because we're going to be bouncing around a lot of different things. I told Michelle before we started, this realm of information is like an old Christmas sweater. You can pull on any thread and it's going to come apart, but there's a lot of threads and they are severely loose. I like to dive into a bit of the deep end. If there was any way of going in some kind of order, or starting at some idea, some semblance of a beginning, I think it might be with the premise that whatever these controllers or these archons, whatever we want to call them, these negative ETs, this attack that happened on the Earth's grid that caused what we look at as damage in the terms of landscape, in the terms of what is now considered to be nature, as opposed to before. When you look at the idea of star forts, for example, and anybody familiar with video games, anybody with children, or maybe you play it yourself, there's a game called Fortnite. And Fortnite not only has star forts, but it has these world-ending events that where these negative entities come in and this grid collapses and there's a firmament, all these kinds of things, mocking a history. But if you don't recognize it, if you don't know, then you just don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because along with what we know about Greco-Roman, so-called Greco-Roman architecture, or Tartarian Moorish architecture that is all over the world, you have small islands like Malta or Puerto Rico or Cyprus that have star forts on them. And I know you specifically go into that in a couple of chapters in one of your books about the islands being on the grid. I know that was all over the place, but please land wherever you choose.
Okay. So to the point about video games and other things like that, they're telling us all the time. They're telling us in games, they're telling us in music, they're telling us in movies. They're telling us exactly what happened because they have to. And so they've chosen these routes as their karmic get out of jail free card. Hey, we told them. But up until I really started waking up to all this stuff, I never went to a movie thinking, well, I was just told something about this world. Movie 2012 comes to mind. I didn't get that from watching the movie. You know, I featured the Poseidon Adventure from 1972 in a recent video that I put together about what I think caused the cataclysm that destroyed this world. And now I'm at like one of the cataclysms, but a main one, because the disclosure in the Poseidon Adventure was this gigantic cruise ship being turned upside down on New Year's Eve in the Aegean Sea from a tidal wave that originated from the Isle of Crete. And I saw that movie when I was 9. You know, they turned the world upside down with what they did, you know, and then you have this movie with these survivors trying to get out of the ship by going up, and a lot of people were killed and died horrible deaths in that. You know, I mean, there was nothing uplifting about that movie, but you know, there's this whole genre of disaster movies, you know, and again, movies are a main way that they disclose, as well as books and television programs and things like that. And so, you know, they're telling us through these vehicles because they do have to tell us. And so that's one of the ways they do it. And we were talking before we got started that, you know, with the youngsters in the 1800s, so they've got all these kids, a lot of orphans, and so you've got a young population, and a lot of things were coming out. Dime westerns came in at the end of the Civil War, and they were targeting young boys. Pulp magazines, pulp fiction grew out of that, and then it went into dime museums, which were basically freak shows in a museum. P.T. Barnum, who is really a shady character. They were lowering the collective consciousness. You know, they were focusing us on the physical, and not just the physical, but odd things in the physical. They were having barnstorming shows and having people look up, you know, not around them. And before I move on with something about that, you look at Charles Dickens and the movie, I mean, the books about orphans during the Industrial Revolution, workhouses, poorhouses, you know, that was life during that time for humanity. And the elites were living high on the hog and had this human problem. And so something needed to be done with the kids, and the adults, they got drunk basically, and then they blamed the adults for their alcoholism. Very strange thing in the narrative, because on the one hand you have all this alcohol and these charitable, quote unquote, charitable organizations coming up, and then on the other hand they have what they called the temperance movement, which was supposed to, you know, anti-drinking, but it was all, that was like controlled opposition, because they were all part of the same controllers in our world. The best known families, the Astors, the DuPonts, the Olmsteads, the Peabodys, the Rockefellers, the Forbes, Carnegie, they were all part of this effort, Vanderbilts, to bring in this new world order and bring us in the agenda that they wanted to impose on humanity and the earth in order to control us and to harvest all the resources, the so-called natural resources, which I don't think were natural. I think they were part of the grid system. I think the Earth's grid system was a circuit board, and everything was perfectly placed on the Earth for a purpose. And they blew that out when they created this cataclysm. What I want to go back to is there was more rail and electric streetcar infrastructure in 1900, way more than there is today. And they have the flimsiest stories imaginable if you actually go looking for this stuff, about how they came into being. They built all of it, and then within a few years they took it out, or they mined all the resources and they took the railroad out. They didn't need it anymore. They replaced it with a rail trail. So you have these recreational trails over railroads. You have highways over what were railroads. My belief is that they, first of all, needed a replacement energy source when they took out the free energy of the grid system. But I think they were also replacing it with our energy and creating the matrix. So the trains, for example, would have been providing some energy function on the Earth's grid, like the star forts you were talking about. And so they just wanted to harvest everything, the resources, make a lot of money, our energy. It's all going somewhere. Somebody's benefiting from it, and we don't even know about it. We don't know about it when we go to football games or concerts or all this other stuff, that there's configurations of stadiums, either acoustically or with how they're shaped, that create vortexes. And then they create the pros and the cons, or the yelling, or whatever, the home team, the away team, or just a lot of emotion. That emotion is generating energy, and it's being harvested somewhere. I've done a lot of work with Chad Williams from the Deeper Conversations with Chad channel, and he's done a lot of good work along those lines. And for me, in finding the star forts and things like that along the grid lines, to me, the history fell out tracking ley lines that I plotted from discovering a star tetrahedron by connecting the dots of cities in North America. And I had learned about sacred geometry around 2007. So I knew what it was. I knew what sacred geometry was. And then I found this star tetrahedron on a map about the same time that I was waking up to megaliths in my everyday environment where I was living in Oklahoma City. I met a Moorish American man in 2013. After I moved to Oklahoma City, I went there to be close to my family and help take care of my mom. And I moved there from Fairbanks, Alaska. And had I not answered the family call, I would never move to Oklahoma. And if I never moved to Oklahoma, I wouldn't be here talking with you right now, or have 6 years of work that I've diligently been pursuing this whole subject. But when I met my friend Pharaoh Osiris, I learned about the Moors, and I didn't know about the Moors before that. And my preparation for that was reading books by Graham Hancock and Fingerprints of the Gods. And Robert Bauval put a book out with another man about the Orion mystery, talking about the belt stars of Orion lining up with the pyramids of Giza. I read that, my mouth's hanging open. I'm like, more. I discovered the Megalithomania channel and conferences on YouTube, and I'm watching that, and I'm learning about these the dowsers that were bringing back knowledge from the ley lines, and then I saw researchers that were doing research on how the Earth is basically a star map, a reflection of what's up in the heavens with pyramids and mounds and how they relate to constellations and the Pleiades and Orion. And, I'm learning about all of that. And it's like, okay, this didn't just happen. This is not random. And that's what our history really wants us to believe. And that's where their narrative really falls apart. And they've been able to control the narrative because they control the educational system, they controlled the publishing. But when the internet came along, that changed everything. Gave us a level playing field and the ability to do our own research. And, for many of us, content creation, because I never did anything like this in my life up until I started blogging and making videos in 2018. It took about 2 years for me to get started with that, from the time that I found the North American star tetrahedron and wrote down all the places that lined up in that. That's what this is. I wrote down what lined up in circles and lines, long distance alignments, and that really formed the basis of my original research. And then from there, when I started looking at specific places, one off the top of my head was a circle alignment that started in Merida, Mexico, that I followed through the Keys and Miami and into the Bahamas and to Bermuda, and then on around to Greenland and the North Pole. I dropped down into Siberia and down through through the Hawaiian Islands, and then back up into Mexico. And that's just one example, but I learned so much from the process of looking at each and every place that basically everything just fell out. And then from the perspective of sacred geometry and the Moorish paradigm, and then a friend who was a Moor, who a very quiet person, but he brought in a stream that tied it all together for me. And I was open to it because I wanted to know the truth. That's all I wanted to know. And I wasn't getting truth anywhere. And then I learned about the Moors and the Washita Moors, and it started to make sense. It's like, okay, this is it. and so I've used sacred geometry and the Moorish paradigm as my guides, plus whatever guides I have on the other side, looking at these places and pulling out comparisons. So there's a lot of comparisons of architecture and rivers and canals, and found worldwide the S-shaped river bends. That's not natural. That was created. And then the ancient civilization built railroads next to these S-shaped river bends, and these railroads were an important component of the Earth's grid system and generation of electricity, going through gorges and hydroelectric plants through the area, and then bridges and incline railways, and it's old world stuff. And again, they just stick these flimsy stories on everything to give an explanation for how they came into existence. But they've also given this narrative that we were low tech when they were supposed to be doing all this stuff. And so, there's so much more to this, but that's the bottom line, is that they've lied about everything. And people are starting to wake up. They want information, they want truth. And even within my community on YouTube, we can all agree on that 1800s time frame for the reset, starting sometime around the mid 1700s, and what's been going on with that. A lot of people are there. I believe that the cataclysm was caused deliberately. There's a lot of people that believe that it was caused by natural cycles. And again, the only thing we seem to agree on with that is that it was the time frame of the reset. but I see this, I already know about the Moors. You know, to me, there's no convincing necessary. That's a given. And that it was a highly advanced civilization and higher consciousness. And there may have been different expressions of the same thing in different places. So something we would recognize as European in England and as Japanese in Nagano, Japan, but the same base. So like a Starfort base. So you might have different expressions, but the same template, the same idea. So anyway, those sacred geometry and the Moors, a big starting point for me, and knowing how to interpret the information and just being open to what unfolded and being able to express it in a way that I can give people information to make their own decision, to show how I came along in this journey, to talk about the Moors as the civilizers and highly advanced and higher consciousness, and get it out there. And so it seems to have reached the people that are open to it. And I personally don't have any end in sight for the work that I'm doing. So I'll be doing this forever. No end.
That I very much believe. There's a chapter in your first book about Moors existing in a state of unity consciousness, similar to unified field theory, right? Well, it wasn't a theory, right? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I agree.
There's another universal aspect to the earth or to the realm, in terms of the world's fairs. Shout out to E. He says this is some next level information beyond his pay grade. He needs a starting point. E, pay close attention to Michelle Gibson's channel. Her website is in the description. It's also going across the ticker in the screen, along with her books and works. As in terms of a starting point, when you look at the world's fairs, especially from 1851 in London, in the Crystal Palace, I believe, or is that Paris?
It was 1851 was the Crystal Palace Exposition in London.
Okay, thank you. To 1915 in Panama City, Panama, that era specifically, it's extremely telling because not only do you have these buildings and these cities that are said to be constructed in a year, 2 years, some of them. I know, for example, the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 was supposed to be 1892 because it was supposedly for Columbus, but there's a lot of argument there about whether it was for Columbus or if it was for Columbia, because it's a little known fact that America used to be known as Columbia just as much as it was known as America, especially when we look into the history of the Statue of Liberty. You have these diplomas being passed out. You have new things being introduced like hamburgers and hot dogs and instant coffee. And you also have human zoos, right? So they're essentially kind of hard to talk about. A point that's made in the Old World Order documentary is you often see these very janky, highly questionable photos of construction for the World's Fairs. You know, you have these men with this scaling going up these buildings. Essentially, the buildings are already done, right? But not only that, you know, we're talking about a time of horse and buggies, no cranes, you know, so how were they getting to some of these higher elevations? Not only that, why are there no pictures from the inside There, again, so many threads that anyone you pull, everything just falls apart. Can you speak to the World's Fair era of that time period, please?
Okay. First of all, let me start with a belief that there was a worldwide cataclysm that caused the destruction of a civilization. And so I've come to believe that the sinking of Atlantis took place recently and not thousands of years ago, like we're told. I think the sinking of Atlantis happened within the last couple hundred years at the most. And so swamps were created, estuaries were created, deserts and dunes. There were marshes right next to deserts and dunes in Indiana, the Indiana Dunes area. And Gary, Indiana was buried in sand until they started digging it out in 1906. And said that they built everything, but the pictures and the history kind of show that they were digging it out. And then they started the Gary, Indiana U.S. Steel Works there. And they were mining the iron ore and, all the things they needed for steel in the mines up through there. And so anyway, they got Gary up and running, but it's located right next to the Indiana Dunes National and State Park. And then there's a history of railroads through that area. And I think the cataclysm went through the grid system. And, like I said, with the rail earlier, that was a part of it. The star forts were a part of it. Lighthouses were part of it. And, you see where all land is just broken off by these lighthouses and by these railroad tracks. And so, well, of course, the lighthouses were built in the 19th century to guide ships, right? They needed to guide ships because of all these rocks here right next to the lighthouses. Well, what if it wasn't next to rocky cliffs? That it was there as a distributor of light energy, for example. And that the lighthouses were part of this energy grid system and very sophisticated. And they were also lined up with what was going on up in the heavens. And so you can find them aligned with solstices and lunar events, just like standing stones that we hear about in places at Angkor Wat, where you have the sun that goes perfectly up the center spire of the mid temple there at the front entrance of Angkor Wat. See all these perfect alignments everywhere. And so it wasn't just the ancient megalithic stone structures. That perfect alignment existed up until whenever this civilization ended with so-called modern buildings. It's the same phenomena. You can look up Capitol buildings and mosques and churches, so-called church buildings, and they have these solar and lunar alignments. The Taj Mahal, it was perfect. It was perfectly aligned, and I think part of this, I call it the perfect alignment of heaven and earth. And they knew what they were doing. They knew where they were. When we think of our history in terms of ancient to modern, well, I think that was the original civilization's history of ancient to modern. And then it got taken down and the legacy was stolen and misattributed. And, we've just been given all these falsehoods and taught falsehoods our whole lives about our history and, everybody's place in it and what happened. And, it's no wonder people get so confused about, when you try to introduce new information and say, hey, wait a minute, humanity was highly advanced and evolved. It sounds kind of crazy, but the controllers stuck it in the literature. And if you look at the literature of the 1600s, the early masques, MASQUES, they made King James the centerpiece of their rollout. And I personally believe that King James of Scotland was connected with the House of Solomon, like the Solomonic emperors of Ethiopia. I think there was a direct connection there. And so the controllers just kind of, borrowed from, took that legacy as their own, and then they gave a new King James and hung their new narrative on King James, the King James Bible, and plantations of Ulster and Ireland. So they took over Ireland, Northern Ireland, and then they transferred the same system over to New England and did the exact same thing. Brought in their settlers and started their plantations, and that started with King James, with the union of the thrones of England and Scotland. There's other things about that time period in terms of their new, turning businesses into people, the process of incorporation and royal charters, and all these other things about how they brought their new system in, and how they claimed ownership of the land. A lot of that stuff was going on during that time. So they were getting their new fake system up and running, and how they justified taking the land and taking human liberties away from all the places that they colonized, and seemed to have brought in new languages about that time. The modern languages originated around that same period of time. You find true history in Francis Bacon and Silva Savarum and New Atlantis. A friend of mine, Stephanie McPeak Peterson, has done a lot of work on that and opened my eyes to that. I'll get to your question in just a second. To how much is hidden away in literature, she opened my eyes to that. There's a ton of information during that time period. And then there's a book called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race by, I believe it's Edward Bulwer Lytton. And I haven't read the book, I've looked at it. That's what pops up when you type Vril into a search engine. That looks to be another book that's telling about this original advanced civilization underground, connected to a tree, a giant tree, and giant trees were part of this original system too. Books like Utopia by Thomas More, and one of the first books in Castilian Spanish was about the Queen of California, Califia, and a story about that. And they're telling us about this celestial or terrestrial paradise in these books, but they're telling us that it's fiction. The New Atlantis is something in the future, but if you look at what New Atlantis talks about, they're talking about the House of Solomon, Saloman, and the Moors and the Atlantean civilization. So they've tucked it away in these places. They've tucked it away in Shakespeare, and there's so much encoded in that. You'd have a blast with that. Trying to figure out all the codes and the alchemy in a lot of these books. And then it looks like they inverted, like everything else, they inverted alchemy to use against us. So they inverted everything that was for good, and because that seems to be all that they can do. They can't do this stuff on their own. They have to subvert it and twist it, which apparently they can do. And again, it seems like until the internet came online, they were pretty much getting away with it. I look at the internet as being a big tool of the awakening. Who is they that knew how to operate all these properties of energy, i.e. bells, churches, etc.? They knew something, because they targeted the bells. Bells were a very important part of the system. And then the buildings that were turned into churches, it seems like they were part of the energy system and had more to do with healing and resonance. Organs are part of that. It seems to be music and frequencies seems just to be a part of how the universe operates, and that was true here. I see Earth as like a grand central station for the universe, so that there was a lot that was going on here that was keeping the universe in balance, and so the controllers, it seems like they reversed all of that stuff, and they started to use frequency to control us and keep us in fear and confusion instead of the healing frequencies and things like that. So they knew enough to target those things, is what I'm finding, because more seems to be coming out about that kind of thing.
Something that I think is telling, once the major attack, had happened, once the major blowout of the grid in certain areas had happened, certain other things over time obviously had to be destroyed. I want to say rise in power to James W. Lee, aka Jamie from AplainTruth.info, passed a few months ago. His incredible works live on in the library, I'm thankful to say. He had an interesting take in terms of some of the hows and whys. When you look into asylums of the era, not just the asylums, universities, hospitals, post offices, some of these grand, train stations, these incredible buildings that have become staples. There's no history of anyone, witnessing their construction, even though, they were around this time, because it would have called for hundreds of people, if not thousands, just to move some of these stones. And then you have these narratives of some of these buildings, especially like one of the Crystal Palaces, was moved from one location to another. Like that's, come on, it's the ideas that we're given are incredible. In terms of what some of these people were disappeared for, like for example, you mentioned the orphans. When we look at American classic literature like Anne of Green Gables, Little Orphan Annie, Oliver Twist, Little House on the Prairie, this era had so much going on in terms of literally hitting you from every angle. On top of the Great Fires, every major city suffered a Great Fire. One of my favorite series that you've done is the Poking Around the Great Fire series. Can you speak to that a little bit in relation to, because, for example, when we look at Dresden, Dresden was essentially firebombed, almost beyond belief, very similar to what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They say that they dropped a bomb, but you had vegetation coming back within 3 weeks in some accounts, and not much evidence of radiation. So everywhere we look, the narrative doesn't match the evidence.
It's fabrication, and the big names that I mentioned before, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the DuPonts, the Astors, the Forbes, all the ones that we recognize were involved in this whole reset and finance. I mean, they got the canals up and running, and they started to grow cotton. They took out the fine clothing of the original civilization, the gold and the silks, and they replaced it with cotton, which led to everything associated with cotton, from slavery and picking cotton to getting that over to England, to mills to turn into clothes. There was a big connection between America and England at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution around that. Going from natural dyes to synthetic dyes, the process of making hats and things like that with mercury. This whole thing of poisoning us through clothes and food and whatever else has been going on for a long time. So I bring that up because this is a very complex plan that they had that's going to fail. They're not going to get away with it. But it's like everything that they did was geared towards destroying the civilization, getting up and running what they needed. So the canals and the railroads for the coal and the iron ore, for the factories, everything that they needed for their new civilization, make as much money as they possibly could, pay people as little as they possibly could, give us this whole new narrative, especially in the United States with the whole liberty and freedom thing, which was never their real intention, but they had to get us to buy into all of this stuff. And using the same MO that they used to take down the original civilization is what we're seeing today. And kind of turning the narrative, but it's not for our benefit. But if they can keep us focused on each other and being mad at each other and fighting each other, then they can go on and do whatever they want, because they really can't lay a finger on us. They have to get us to do that. They have to get us to do their dirty work, because we don't know who we are and we don't know how powerful we are, and as a collective. And so if they can keep us distracted and angry and upset and in fear, that's all they really care about, because that's their vibe. That's what they need for themselves. And it kind of makes it challenging. So it's an exciting time to be alive, but it's also very challenging, especially for people that are awake, to process through the state of consciousness of love, and be there, knowing all the other stuff that's going on is going, but so they're masters at that. They're masters at manipulation and distraction. And so they set up their whole new economy on consumerism and, getting us to pay for the movies that we go watch for mind control, and, eating the junk food that's not good for us at all, drinking the alcohol that's destroying our insides, whatever causes cancers, they're doing that. They've just been shoveling it to us, and in the state of unconsciousness that humanity has been in, we don't know any better as a collective. Groups within that know, but it's starting to equalize more and more people are waking up. And so they, with their new system, and I think United States was probably their cash cow, to fund the destruction in wars of these other places. So they make it sound good, and we're, fighting for democracy and freedom and all that stuff, and, going over and bombing all these places like Dresden and star forts and opera houses, which are part of it. Everything, every piece of infrastructure had a function on the Earth's grid system. And they were highly advanced and evolved. And that's why I say they were overthrown by a sudden cataclysmic event that essentially buried them where they were. Land sunk off, swamps were formed, deserts were formed. A lot of this stuff was around lighthouses and along the coast. And so it basically changed the surface of the earth. And a lot of the giant bones were mentioned in articles in the 19th century in papers. And there were two kinds of articles. One would talk about mounds, which I'm not sure that they were burial mounds, but okay. Whatever they, that's what they told us. They found these giant skeletons and mounds. But workmen would dig up giant skeletons in a lot of different places. And I really believe they are right underneath us. And with the downside to the internet is people start to catch on to these things, and then you see the fact checkers and hoax, but it's not a hoax. They have to keep us from figuring this stuff out. And at the same time they're doing that, there's really creepy, weird public art. There was some in England a couple of years ago where this giant head coming up out of the ground, or giant bodies that are, the head's under the ground and their legs are up in the air. There's at the Buddha Castle in Budapest in Hungary, they have a labyrinth underneath Buddha Castle, and one of them is called the Crowned Head Gallery. And if you look it up, there's this giant head with a crown, sockets where there should be eyes, and buried up to its nose. I don't think that's a work of art. I think that's a real head. And there's some other works of art. Seward Johnson did some. He was known for his lifelike sculptures covered in gold or whatever metal he used. You just have to wonder what was going on with that guy. He's a part of the Johnson and Johnson family. And if you look up his name, Seward Johnson, the sculptures I'm thinking of are called The Awakening, and there's two identical sculptures. One's in Oxon Hill, Maryland, and the other is in Missouri, of this giant that's trying to break free from the ground, and he's got a tortured look on its face, and his fingers and the parts of his body that are sticking up look so lifelike. And again, they tell us these things indirectly, not directly. And so to me, they're telling us that there's this race of giants that existed until very recently that were buried, is what I've come to believe about all this. And then one of the great things about the Old World Order is just showing all of the giant-sized architecture that's out there. And if you're going to start with questioning something, look at it. It's not built by people our size. State capitals, university buildings, the Supreme Court building in Washington, the National Basilica at Catholic University. Those are just very few. They are not built by people of our size. And this is the architecture that they want to take credit for, and say we built this, let's say sometime between 1840 and 1920, because that seems to be when they were having their building frenzy, when our narrative does not support that we were even capable of it during that time. I cover a lot of this stuff on my website and my YouTube channel. I've looked into all of it in depth. So when I say something, I've got a lot of compelling evidence to back it up.
Most definitely, most definitely. You reminded me of something. I want to say love, peace, and power to Chief Pontiac Rod Hayes. Shout out, love, peace, and power to a young elder. They did an incredible live, it was more of a documentary about how castles turned into prisons here in North America. And you have a magnificent chapter in one of your books about the castles and ruins of North America. Can you speak to that just a little bit, please?
So our narrative teaches us that castles were in Europe. There's castles all over North America, and actually all over the world. So we hear about castles in other countries primarily, and the ones that don't fit the narrative were built in so-called modern times with the accompanying tall tale that goes along with it. And so if you look at China, which is very much a part of this in Dalian, China, I'm thinking of the Dalian Hotel that looks like the Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany that was supposed to have been built by Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria sometime in the 1800s, and that's one I've been to. And put a side-by-side comparison, and they look, they got the same kind of architectural styles, but nope, they got their inspiration from the one in Germany when they built this Dalian castle recently. And then if you look at other architecture in Dalian, it looks like European architecture. And so it's, they do that a lot. It was inspired by like statues of liberty or Eiffel Towers. They're actually all over the earth, but they start with the one in New York and the one in Paris, and all the other ones were based on those templates, but they were again part of the grid system. So those are some of the things that come to mind. They're just explaining. They've gone to great lengths to explain everything that exists on the earth in their narrative, and completely leave out the Moors, with the exception of Moorish Spain. But the nice thing about that is you can look at the architecture in Moorish Spain and see it in all over the earth. You can see the architecture of Moorish Spain on the Isle of Hormuz Island in the Strait of Hormuz between the United Arab Emirates and Iran, and southern Iran. So their lies fall short. Where as far as people waking up to this, why can't people just get it? The level of brainwashing and mind control has gone really deep. And, especially when you look at organized religion and dogmatic thinking, the Bible says this or doesn't say that, or, it kind of keeps people from thinking critically and, not asking any further questions. If the Book of Enoch says that the trees were cut down at a certain time, that's where the conversation stops. Whereas it sure looks like the giant trees were blown out when the grid system was blown out, and that's what I'm seeing. Places like Pilot Mountain in North Carolina as a giant tree stump, and it's a hub. It's a highway hub. It's a railway hub, and these giant trees seem to have been a critical part of the original infrastructure and the original grid system, and I believe a critical connection with source. Yes, I'm talking about melanated people when I'm talking about Moors. It's interesting because there's something going on with the controllers and coal and carbon, and so when they started to do the mining in Pennsylvania was where they really got their new system up and running. So they got the canals going, and then they got the railroads going there, and then they mined the the anthracite coal in the anthracite region of Pennsylvania. And that runs from Scranton to Harrisburg and has the purest coal in the world. 95% carbon. That was like their magic bullet when they were finding a replacement fuel source for taking out the free energy grid. And then they got into the bituminous coal, like the Pocahontas coal field in West Virginia and Virginia. So anyway, they're going after I'm bringing this up because there's something about carbon and coal that is extremely important. And and looking into different things about that and melanin it's like what's come up in conversations and in just doing some research is that whole idea that it's concentrated light and that melanin is a superconductor. And so there are big secrets that are being kept from humanity as a collective by the lies that have been told, and there's something that is coveted by the controllers with that. If the melanin is a superconductor, then like you're right there with source, and there's just something there. I'm not knowledgeable enough to. I can intuitively make guesses, but there's just important parts of the story of the reality of where we are, the true nature and the true reality of the earth realm and how it operates. That's just been so kept from us, and egregious lies told about everything to keep us consuming and fighting and guessing and wondering, when the truth is there if you look for it. And if you're motivated and want to find the answers, the truth is there. I'm not going to say it's not hard to find, because it is hard to find, but it's still there if you know what to look for and how to interpret it.
All you have to do is look. Michelle alone has a myriad of resources going back years. You will spend years to go through it. We are barely scratching the surface of all that she has contributed and looked into. In terms of the lengths these controllers, these powers that should not be, will go to, if people don't get it. I remember being a child when the first Jurassic Park came out, and I remember the push for that movie. I mean, it was absolutely everywhere. I'm going to have to look it up, but I think, just for example, I think McDonald's and Burger King had Jurassic Park at the same time. That never happens. Just to show you, how serious it was to push that narrative. But Jurassic Park was all about DNA. It was all about cloning. When you got down to the core of it. But the idea of dinosaurs, the idea of the Smithsonian, the idea of archaeology, what they are purported to be here for versus what they actually do. There's no such thing as dinosaurs. Just look into the word, look into the origin, look into the first supposed skeleton found, the first so-called fossils, and compare them to your own genetic makeup. There's tons of literature, and you need look no further than some of these buildings that we've been talking about, because these buildings were obviously not built for us. They were not built for people our size. I'm 6'4". If you're 6'2" or over, you're taller than 95% of the population of the earth, right? So we're talking about people, skeletons being found of 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot, and beyond giants. We have pictures. In particular, we have pictures of Moors, these giant Moors in full garb, in full regalia, from this same area, the same time period that we're talking about. You have giant doors that have smaller doors our size cut into them. Can you speak to that, please?
One of the many places that the narrative just completely falls apart. And yes, the Smithsonian and the American Antiquarian Society and the National Geographic Society were all gatekeepers. I believe the American Antiquarian Society started sometime around, I want to say 1812, somewhere in there. Smithsonian in the 1840s. National Geographic, same idea, mid 1800s, and strictly by the elite families to start to control the narrative and put their spin on what things are, like the dinosaurs. In my last series on the Trail of Giants in Appalachia and beyond, and if you don't read or see anything else that I put out there, I did a 4-part series based on a longer one, that there was so much information in the long one that I wanted to bring it out because I didn't want it to get lost. And so the first one is called Robber Barons and Resetters, the second one Giants, the third the Energy Grid, and the fourth the Cataclysm. There is some overlap, but each one is different. And it's probably the most complete summary of the work that I've done, that I have on my YouTube channel and my website on the Trail of Giants in Appalachia and beyond. And I recommend starting with theme 1. The original On the Trail of Giants in Appalachia and beyond is 3 hours long. I'm not saying the others are that much shorter, but that one was kind of my journey of discovery. And so you're with me as I'm learning all these things and finding all of these things out. And it's really very interesting if you can hang with me and enjoy my discovery with me of the things that I found when I was looking at these different places. But as I was looking at the different places, I found the Energy Grid, I found giants, I found the Cataclysm, I found, who was behind it, the robber barons. It is like, but I learned that the so the connection between the giant trees and the mines and the controllers, and how they were getting all the infrastructure up and how they were mining everything, and then when they were done with that and done with cutting down the trees, they took out the railroads, gave us rail trails, planted forests. Oh, we're so sorry we cut down all the trees. We're going to have the Civilian Conservation Corps under FDR replant them because we're good conservators of nature. All this stuff popped out, and that there's a connection between tree roots and highway routes. And that came out, and how there were certain routes that were special to the controllers. That came out. And there was just so much. So, that would be like the best introduction to my work. And then it does go back to June of 2018. So I've got a whole journey and a whole lot of information that's relevant to all of this. And when Colin and I were talking before we started, the books that I published have research in them from, let's say, 2019, 2019, 2019, So that was the beginning of my journey, but I covered a lot of the things during those years that came up in Old World Order, which was something that Khalil mentioned. And it's true. I mean, with the Moorish paradigm and sacred geometry and cities and places on alignment, you know, I had the clues and the keys that I needed because I knew how to interpret what I was seeing to be able to figure it out and put it into perspective. And without the Moorish paradigm and, you know, this beautiful worldwide civilization, it really doesn't make sense. But when you have that piece about the Moors, everything makes sense. And that's something very terrible happened here. That, you know, has been ongoing, you know, in terms of what's been happening on Earth. And I believe from the depths of my soul that they're not going to get away with this, and that we will see that sooner rather than later.
No, they know they're not going to get away with it. They didn't expect to last as long as they've lasted. When I think about the actual power of word of mouth, and I'm talking about before the internet. You know, I'm an 80s baby, so, you know, I remember, you know, if something happened, you know, overnight, it was on the phone, you know, or you were going to hear about it in the morning. You know, it was that powerful. So there's really no excuse. You know, we can blame the powers that should not be. We can blame the Illuminati, but until we choose to look into how form truly denotes function, until we choose to truly know thyself, until we choose to ask the question, because at some point, something has to stand out to you. This time period, you know, that we keep going back to these 1800s, 1900s, you had so much going on that has to force you to question, you know, from inconceivable construction, inconceivable destruction. You know, the whole narrative of the World's Fairs, for example, they were all torn down afterwards. And we have to remember, and this is actually stated in the documentary as well, you know, they were World's Fair expositions. Exposition is telling a story, right? Weaving a narrative. So when you're giving out diplomas, you know, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. What up, though? Shout out to Detroit. I love my city. I love it. I didn't realize until maybe 10 years ago that there was a World's Fair in Detroit in 1889.
And you still have the Guardian and the Fisher Building.
My mother worked there.
just amazing architecture. And with the World's Fairs, there's in each place there's typically maybe one or two buildings that remain standing that are mind-blowing, like the one in Chicago that's featured in the Old World Order documentary. I believe it's the Museum of Science and Industry. The Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco is still standing, and that's a marvel. And to go along with their narrative, you know, we built this after the Great Fire, you know, to show San Francisco rising out of the ashes and a wonderful inspiration for the world and for the future. You know, they always couch it in those terms, you know, to progress and look at what we did and things like that. And, you know, sadly, this is all deception and, you know, where we have to use discernment with everything. You know, I really encourage people to do their own research, and that's something that I feel very strongly about when I'm putting videos out and talking to my community. Is you know, go out and look around. You know, see this is in your own backyard. You don't have to go far to find any of this, and you know, to get people looking with new eyes. And you know, the feedback that's coming back, you know, people getting back in touch with me, they're doing that. They're starting YouTube channels, you know, just taking their phone on the camera on their phone and making videos just going around the neighborhood and things like that. So it's coming out to those with eyes to see, and there seems to be more and more of that.
I think that is a very, very beautiful thing. It is a much needed thing. We cannot have enough of that, especially in this Wood Dragon year. This is a universal 8 year. It is extremely karmic. Either we're going to move into the same or fall into the same loop, or we're going to evolve. And it's going to be a continuous test. We need only look around to see that, but it can be such a beautiful time if you realize, who you are, where you are, why you are. But only you can determine that. No one can tell you that for you, nor should they. Michelle, I cannot thank you enough for joining me yet again. It's been, I think, about 8 months since your last visit. It will not be so long until your next one, I pray. Do you have anything you're working on you'd like to tell us about, or anything you'd like to give more light to?
Whew. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is if people in your audience haven't seen Old World Order documentary yet, the easiest way to tell you is to go to stewpeters.com, and it's on his landing page, and it's free to watch. They just ask for email and you get right on in. And so this is free across platforms. It started there as the presenter of the program. Sean Hibbler is a documentarian and filmmaker, and Stu backed the project for Sean. And I believe it's going to Vimeo and also Movies Plus, and again, it's going to be free across platforms. And it's a very well done documentary that's jam-packed with information, and it's a good summary for people that are already familiar with this, and hopefully a thought-provoking introduction for people that aren't. And it's more geared for the people that aren't, but it is a good summary for the people that are already aware of this. One thing I want to bring up is something I'm in the middle of editing right now, and I might have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the man that reached out to me last year and said, hey, look at Appalachia. And when I looked at Appalachia, it's like the whole story fell out. And that was where On the Trail of Giants and Appalachia and Beyond came from. He was impulsed to look at Kirkbride facilities on the Earth's grid system. And so he put in Kirkbride facilities. That was the insane asylum plan of the mid-19th century. They started showing up about 1849 in Trenton, New Jersey. When he did that, it's like the whole Earth grid popped out. And there's so much to unpack with that. I just did an interview with them, and we're getting the ball rolling, but there is so much that is coming forward from what the alignments he's found based on the Kirkbride facilities, including the ancient sacred sites are directly connected to this grid system, to the rail and to everything else. So Serpent Mound and Granaya Sharia in Siberia, the Badlands Guardian, just in North America alone, Gettysburg, the New River Gorge, Boise. It's all Machu Picchu is right next to the Urubamba River, which has a train going by it. Newgrange in Ireland is right next to a canal. I mean, the ancient sites and the modern, so-called modern infrastructure of the grid are integrally connected. And so it's really groundbreaking. And it's a work in progress, but I should have the first interview up on my channel probably within the next couple of days, and it's pretty mind-blowing. And the connection of the Civil War sites, star forts, mounds, all of this is interconnected. And so anyway, it seems like the universe conspires to help people when you have a mission. And so that seems to be the case. A lot of this stuff is coming forward synchronistically with people like my friend Aaron and other people that I work with. It's like we're on different aspects of the same thing, but our work is very synchronistic, and we ping off of each other. And the synchronicities have been quite fun with all of this.
That's the way it's supposed to be. It's always darkest before the dawn, but when you got a friend in need and you have, a warrior on your side that you may not necessarily always expect to be there, but they show up when you need them most, it doesn't really get too much better than that, especially in terms of fighting this war, waging these battles, because it is eternal. Evil prospers when good people do nothing. And we go much further together than we ever will alone. The real magic happens when we come together, and I will enact that for as long as I have breath. Thank you so much for joining me yet again. I will reach out to you very soon. I hope to have you back even sooner. I look forward to your latest work. I cannot wait. If there's anything you ever need from me, please don't wait to reach out. Anything I can do to help further the cause. I want to say love, peace, and power to everybody who joined me here tonight. Everybody on Facebook, everybody on Instagram, everybody on YouTube. I cannot thank you enough. Please like and share the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. I'm at 199 subscribers. So if you happen to be my 200th subscriber and you can hear the sound of my voice, you get a free reading. You get free access to the Patreon. You get a free grimoire reading from me and access to the library. So please hit me up. Check in with me for your numerology readings, your astrocartography, your astrology, cardiology, and so much more. Love, peace, and power to you and yours. Enjoy the evening. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy each other. Love each other. And we will see each other soon. Thank you again, Michelle.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I look forward to coming back. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Most definitely. Love, peace, and power, y'all.